So excited to be here. I'm Kristen Cahill from GCI Health, and really thrilled to introduce you to my fellow panelists today, which I'll do right now. So thrilled to have Aaron Radlett, who is the SVP and Global Chief Communications Officer from Walgreens Boots Alliance. Sarah Alspach from Bluebird Bio, Chief Communications Officer there. Amanda Forster, the VP of Communications from Premier. And Ed Harnaga, who is the SVP and Global Head of Communications and Enterprise Reputation at Pfizer, if I got that correct. Okay, all right. So as Paul said, it has been quite an exhilarating, and I would offer exhausting few years to be on the front lines of healthcare. And I think we would all agree, though, that it's also been such an amazing opportunity to show up differently with our brands and our organizations, to engage stakeholders in different ways, and to rally our employees in new and different ways. So we're excited to dig into some of the learnings from the front lines of this. And I promised I would kick off with a softball, a layup question. So really just want to ask you all, and we can go down the line. Aaron, if we can start with you. What is your biggest learning from the last few years, and what do you think this group would benefit from hearing?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, hi, everybody. It's great to be here and talking about such an important topic. And I think my lesson is probably very similar to a lot of you, which is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think we all sort of looked around and said, how the heck are we going to do this? And just to give one stat, we have 65 million vaccinations already administered through Walgreens right now. And how do you get to 65 million vaccinations? Well, one vaccination at a time. And that's the same thing that I told my team and that we told our team members who were coming into the stores in the middle of a pandemic that nobody had ever seen before. And that we didn't have to pretend like we had all the answers. This is very uncomfortable for all of us as communicators, because we like to have everything all packaged up before we distribute the message. But much like us as individuals, sometimes having a bit of vulnerability breeds trust. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we found as we spoke to our customers or our other stakeholders, that when we said we didn't completely have all the answers, then they trusted us more. When we said that we had some information that they didn't, they trusted us even more at that point too. And relationships matter, because there is a reason that the pharmacist is one of the most highly trusted professions. And we wanted to make sure that we brought across the pharmacists, that they were still talking to their patients, that we took advantage of that, but that we also just said, look, we're going to get the message out there. We're not going to wait 3 weeks to get it out there. It's too important to wait. And that's something that we're going to try to carry into our years ahead, because, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, in this world, I think in a lot of ways, it's better that it's not.
Yeah, as a recovering perfectionist, I love that answer. Sarah?
Sure. Again, thanks for having us today. It's great to be here. I think maybe a bit of a different perspective. So for the last 4 years, I've been focused in the rare disease space, 2 different organizations on both the nonprofit side and now at an organization called Bluebird Bio. And I think really what the pandemic and the events of the last year really did is sort of give us this walk in someone else's shoes in a way that we had never really appreciated before. Thinking about the vast number of people who live with health restrictions, with challenges that they're dealing with every day. And I think that we really firsthand started to experience what is that like if you don't have the freedom that you're used to in all instances, when you are living with a bit of fear and an undercurrent of what you might be exposed to or the impact on your health. I think it's certainly given the organizations that I am with and the communities that we serve a completely different perspective in how we're communicating and how we're really thinking about what their real life needs are, not sort of what is being discussed within our organization, but actually what is being discussed by those we're trying to reach, what are their needs, and thinking entirely differently about how we're serving up information that's truly meaningful to them.
Love that. Great.
Yeah, again, thank you for having me. I feel a little intimidated following Jen Psaki, but I'm going to try and make the best of it. I think I think 2 big lessons learned for our organization. We are not a household name. Premier, you probably don't know what we do. We're a healthcare alliance. We do group purchasing for all the nation's healthcare systems and hospitals, we also have a technology arm that helps them automate their operations. So when we went into the pandemic, we were not a household name like a Pfizer or a Walgreens, but we did know supply chain. And folks may recall at the beginning of the pandemic, there were lots of shortages and there were lots of problems. And so we took the attitude that we really needed to be the source of truth. There was a lot of misinformation about what was going on in the marketplace, why things were short, where they were short, where things were going wrong. A lot of confusion about what the supply chain actually does and what the interdependencies are. So we had a lot of education that we had to do, both about ourselves as a business, but also about what was really going on in the marketplace dynamics. And I think one of the mantras that we sort of rallied around as an organization was that we needed to be as we wished to appear. So if we wanted to be problem solvers, and if we wanted to be the folks that were actively going to go out there and tackle this shortage situation and bring things to the marketplace, we actually had to do that. And there is no spin, right? Like everybody got the decoder ring and then they can parse your language and figure out what's true and what's not. And then they can call other sources and figure out, did this really happen? So we were very adamant about be as we wish to appear. And we as an organization were very mission oriented in the sense that there was literally nothing that we wouldn't do. We went to very weird lengths sometimes in order to get providers supplies that they needed. We partnered with alcohol distillers in order to get hand sanitizer, which was in short supply. We were going overseas to Thailand and Laos and trying to find people who could make PPE. We were doing anything and everything and partnering in really unconventional ways. And from a communicator standpoint, we had a lot of interesting stories to tell because we had a lot of interesting bedfellows at this point, right? So we were interested in really being a problem solver, and we really wanted to be that source of truth. And we also learned to be the source of choice because, again, we're not a household name. People wouldn't instinctively think to call us into their Rolodex. And we recognized that there were a lot of places that they could go for information, and so we tried to give everybody that called us sort of the Ritz-Carlton white glove treatment, always treating our reporters with great care and making sure that we were providing them with the best information, telling them about things that were known, unknown, helping them see a little bit into the future about what potential implications could happen. And I think that really helped us level up as an organization.
Great. Yeah, authenticity is definitely a key theme, I think, for all of us. Ed?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. There were so many lessons over the past few years, but I think one of the things that I take away from a lot of this is communications having a seat at the table, being in the room where it happens every step of the way. And I'm lucky enough that I have a CEO who really values communications and corporate affairs as a strategic function within the organization. So when we started on this trail towards this journey, towards bringing a vaccine forward, we called it light speed. It was this whole idea of trying to find ways of cutting all the white space out in the process. And what that involved is every night, every other night, a meeting with our CEO, with the head of research, the head of manufacturing, the CFO, the general counsel, every leader possible that could be there, and communications was there. And this was to discuss every issue that happened that day. Where are we with the clinical trial? Where are we with enrollment? What more can we do on that front? How are we doing with supply? How is it coming along? What more can we do there? How can we do this? And almost all of those calls ended with a turn towards communications. Now, based on everything that we've heard today, what are our plans? How are we taking it forward? How are we going to address clinical trial enrollment? How are we going to address all these different things? It was so critical to be at the table there when everything was moving so quickly. And I take that away of really thinking about, we need to advocate for the role of communications. We need to be at the table at every step of the way. It is so critical, particularly when you're dealing with a very complex project. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's been one of the greatest byproducts of the pandemic is the fact that people really have seen the value of communications. And that's a great segue to my next question for you and Aaron, which is obviously we saw an uptick in the healthcare space in terms of reputation and people seeing the value of healthcare organizations that they can bring. We've seen those levels, that uptick kind of come back to baseline in the last few months. What do you attribute that to? And what do you think is the reason for the uptick and maybe a missed opportunity that we had in the industry? Ed, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I like to throw this number out there, 63%. That was our favorability scores at the height of the pandemic. And a lot of people look at me and say 63%, wow, that's not that great at the height of the pandemic, and that's where you're at. But if you look at where we were in January 2020, we were polling at about 28% favorability. So that is a huge jump. But and if you look back to January 2020, that level of 28%, 30% is sort of where the pharmaceutical industry was polling overall. And it's interesting, if you go historically, looking back 10 years or so, you had very little differentiation between pharma companies. They all kind of came in along this line. Maybe every year you had someone that was stood out, but for the most part, it was pretty consistent. I think what's interesting is during this period, you saw not only Pfizer, I think a lot of the vaccine manufacturers that I've seen, the scores have gone up. And I think it's attributable to a few things. I think one is we were there, we were front and center, we were bringing them along on this journey. People were learning about the drug discovery and development process. They were watching it in real time unfold, and they were listening to the transparency and the work that we were doing to bring that forward. I think we had a relevance to people's lives that was so critical. And there was also a sort of like bridge over into the pop culture environment where you saw, I'm team Pfizer, I'm team Moderna. So there were all these different factors that I think worked in favor of elevating the industry. And you started to see, from a pharmaceutical sector perspective, going up into the high 40s. A few months ago, we started to see the decline, not only of the industry of Pfizer. I'm happy that now we're starting to see, again, a little uptick in our reputation on the Pfizer side. And I think a lot of it comes down to we're really digging in and trying to focus on our relevance to society, and not just in COVID, trying to really bring forward all the other work that we're doing, because I think that's so critical. I think we brought people inside of the industry and showed them what we can do, and I think it's important for every company in the sector to kind of continue to do that, bring people in, show them what it takes to get this work done.
Yeah. I love that. Aaron, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I would definitely build on that. I agree with everything Ed just said. Bring people in. So I'll put it in real estate terms, right? When we were in the middle of the pandemic, our doors were wide open. People could see what we were doing because we had to show them, right? We were having an open house and people could walk into every room. I think now, going back to what I was saying earlier, we've sort of shut the doors a little bit. And now it's a bit more, hey, isn't the curb appeal great? But no, we don't really want to bring you into the family room anymore. We're not prepared for that. So what I would say is continue to make sure to build relationships. I think we all probably have that friend in our life that they only call you if they need a favor. You know, it's like, oh, okay, I know why this person is calling. Obviously, she's got something in mind that she needs to ask. You never want to build relationships that way, right? You want to build relationships over time, day in and day out. Again, make sure that you're showing what you can do for your customers and patients. Build on certainly the trust that's there, but there are so many more things that we could be doing as a company if you take Walgreens as an example. So yes, absolutely, people trusted us for testing and vaccinations and get supplies during the pandemic. But how about they trust us to come in and see a doctor right at one of our Walgreens facilities? We're building out clinics right now. What if they trusted us to engage in clinical trials? One thing that we have is a wide demographic spread in our 9,000 stores, and we feel like we could work with a lot of different companies to make sure that we have more diversity among our clinical trials, and that's another exciting opportunity. So what we want to say is, okay, we were able to figure out how we served our customers and patients, building on a brand that's built up over more than 100 years. What more can we do for you now? And continue to build that relationship over time.
Yeah, I love that. It is all about relationships in our industry with lots of different stakeholders. And I do think pulling back that veil a little bit definitely contributed to the feeling like people actually understood what our organizations do, which is great. So on a related note, I want to talk a little bit about purpose, which is obviously a big buzzword and something that we're all constantly hearing as communicators. And of course, as we look to build back stronger and better, our stakeholders are demanding that our business and our purpose be more intrinsically linked. How have you all helped to do that with communications to really link that business and that purpose? And Sarah, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a biotech company that is focused on bringing forward curative therapies for patients, our purpose is our business, absolutely. But what we've tried to do is really make sure that the patients and families that we serve understand what that means for us, that this is about how do they define success. We talk about giving patients and families more Bluebird days. We're Bluebird Bio. And what we don't mean is a beautiful day on the ski slope, because that's not what we think most people are looking for, but it's really ensuring that they understand what we're aiming to give them is an option that untethers them from the healthcare system and allows them to really freely live their lives in the way that they want to. Families are also critically important to us, and so while we're talking about treating patients, we often reflect, even individuals in our own organization, about the impact that serious diseases have on the entire family, and the opportunities that they face, the stress that places on caregivers. And so we really focus entirely on sort of the entire family unit. The other thing that I would say is, and I think we all agree with this, is you have to walk the walk these days. And we see that playing out with large brands, even this week right now with Adidas, we see that playing out. But I think even for small brands, in our case, one of the therapies that Bluebird is working on is for sickle cell disease, which obviously 93% of people living with sickle cell disease are Black or African American, ensuring that we truly take to heart the importance of listening and understanding and internalizing their individual experiences, and not actually just focusing on our science or our product, but actually sort of the broader landscape in which those patients are experiencing healthcare, the disparities, and the racism, frankly, that they confront on a regular basis, and ensuring that we're thinking not just about the science, but about how do we ensure that we are doing our part to improve care and amplify those lived experiences so that we can change them for the better.
Yeah, love that. Amanda?
Yeah, I think I agree very much with everything that you just said. I think Premier is a very mission-oriented organization. We represent the hospitals and the healthcare systems, and at the onset of the pandemic, that is where the pandemic battle was being fought, in the hospitals and the healthcare systems. And we have almost slavish devotion to our members, right? We're ardent and passionate about them. Our mission is to improve the health of communities, and we view it as our responsibility to give them anything and everything that they need in order to execute, in order to make people's lives better. And so for us as communicators, we had that mission-oriented foundation, and we just leaned into it wholesale, because we recognized the fact that everything that we were doing was so critically important to their functioning and their being able to provide the care that people needed. I mean, we were heartbroken when we saw those stories of nurses wearing garbage bags because they didn't have isolation gowns. We were heartbroken about the fact that we saw people in the marketplace trying to take advantage of healthcare systems by trafficking in counterfeit goods, or goods that didn't even exist. So at the height of the pandemic, everything went into short supply. I think most people remember those stories. For us, we viewed it as our responsibility to do everything that we could to overcome that. One of the things that we were able to help with, I think, was the fact that a lot of our members would turn to us and say, you guys are contracting organizations, you know the suppliers that are in the marketplace. We just received 30 fax offers saying that we have 6,000 masks or 300,000 masks. Is this legitimate? And this is not a function of our company, but we would individually vet those offers and do some forensic investigation to see if they were even real. We saw one case where one bill of sale was being used by like 15 different brokers, and we were able to verify the fact that the original bill of sale was a fake and that there were no masks at all. And yet some of our members were sending in checks and trying to get those products, and they just didn't even exist. We even had one employee that actually went around, found the address of the broker, and drove to the house that was supposed to be a warehouse holding like millions of N95 respirators, and it was someone's apartment, right? Obviously a fake. So I think one of the things that we were really proud of as communicators is we blew the whistle on that, starting with the media and then following up with our government relations team. And we started the prosecution effort behind these bad actors that were taking advantage of the hospitals and healthcare systems. And we were in that position on a regular basis, where the work that we were doing, the things that we were talking to reporters about, were spurring government action that was then, it's amazing when you're having a conversation with a reporter on a Tuesday, and then you see a DOJ order on Thursday, and then you see, prosecution starting to happen and people start to get going. It's like, this matters. And that was like a drug for us, and we wanted to do more of those types of things, and that's really what we anchored ourselves around.
Yeah, that's great. And it's such a great segue, Ed, to my question for you around misinformation, right? And obviously, Pfizer was doing a lot of work to get information out on a global scale to diverse audiences, but there was so much information out there. So how did you all combat that and navigate through that?
No, it was a challenge. I mean, look, we're a vaccines company. We've been in the vaccines industry for quite a long time. So I think we always knew that there would be vaccine hesitancy. We always knew that there would be anti-vax rhetoric. What we didn't anticipate, I think, was the level of activity that we would see. And I think it really spurred a lot of things. And I think the conversation with Jen and Robert was really interesting, too, because there's different approaches you could take. I mean, for us, the biggest barriers that we saw was the sheer volume of misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And there's no way that we can respond to everything because it just isn't possible. And the other flip side of it is a lot of the misinformation, the disinformation, is very emotional in nature. So people are responding and sharing this information because there's emotion connected to it. And a factual argument against emotion can sometimes just create more of a firestorm. So for us, we chose in most cases not to respond directly to where the source of that information was coming from, because in reality, sometimes it was really spurring in small corners of social media or other things. And if we did respond, we could elevate that and turn it into a mainstream media story. So we really tried to work a lot in a few different areas. One was the content we were putting out, really trying to make sure that we were addressing this information in proactive content that addressed it in factual ways. So there were places that we can point people to and say, here's the information you need to know about this. Here's where you need to go, the source for what you can look at. We're obviously working with key opinion leaders in the space as well, the relationships that we have there. And a big part of it is the fact checker media. And I think they've just served an incredible role. And I'm just so impressed when I see the work that they do. They really focus a lot on when misinformation or disinformation has a crossover into mainstream. And that's really when, again, if they tried to attack every little piece of disinformation, it would be impossible. But we work with those folks when we can. We give them the information that we have. I'm just impressed about the number of sources they go to look things up. And then the third part that we do is to try and hit the emotional side from a different angle. They're playing on fear. We try to look at a little bit of humor and levity. And some of the things that we're doing in our social media space, I think is really going to that. We're starting to work with TikTok influencers. What's his name? Darian Enwen, who is a great TikTok influencer who does sort of debunking issues about science. And we've worked with him on a few things. One is a program around Science Says that really talks about what's the truth. And more recently, we've worked with him a series called Heard It on the Internet, where he's debunking information in a humorous, in an easy way to explain. And the last piece that I'll just say is even looking at how do we take humor, we created a cartoon character, mRNA, and we have mRNA going to therapy. And it's the whole idea that nobody respects me, they have all these misperceptions about me, and how can I fight back? So trying to hit it in different ways, but to try and make sure that we're getting the truth out there as much as we can.
The Rodney Dangerfield of health communications. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, one of the other, I think, huge anecdotes to misinformation is leveraging community voices and influencers and authentic voices. And you're talking about Ed and Aaron. I'm a huge fan of the work that Walgreens is doing to leverage and harness those community voices and the influencer work you all are doing. So talk to us a little bit about how that strategy played a role the last few years and how it will moving forward for the brand.
Yeah, I think it connects with what all three of you just said. So I think we talk a lot about purpose these days. It's definitely a buzzword, as you said, Kristen, but nobody really steps back and says, what does that really mean, right? Like, it's almost taken on a life of its own. So what I like to say is make sure your purpose is purposeful. And what I mean by that is you need to have the walk to the talk. It goes back to what Ed was saying. If you have a place at the table within your company, you can actually make sure that it's much more about making sure every part of the company is walking that walk, and then you can much more readily talk the talk. And so I would bring that into focus, what you're saying about how did we reach a wide group of people across the entire country. What we said was, who do you trust? Who do you know? If I just went up to you and said, hey, Diana, trust me, and you never even heard of me, then that's not going to work real well. But if you already have built relationships, I'd like to say one of my mottos in life is to be respected by the people that you respect the most. And it's the same thing when you're building a brand in this environment or at any other time. You want to call on your friends, the people that already know you, that trust you. You want to build on community relationships. So, for example, we reached out to various different government groups that we already knew. We reached out to various faith groups that we already knew. We reached out to various community groups that we already knew. And it wasn't the first time that we were picking up the phone. They already knew that we were good people, that they wanted to work with us, that they wanted to help us. The other thing that we did is we injected a little bit of humor. Most recently, if everybody saw on Stephen Colbert, we just had Fauci getting his shot at one of our Walgreens pharmacies. So as much as possible, we tried to add a little bit of levity. And then we also wanted to make sure that we weren't just talking heads in suits saying, go out and get your vaccines. We wanted to make sure that we were using our actual pharmacists and our pharmacists that represented the communities where our stores were. So just as one example, we knew that there was a lot of hesitation among the African American community for very good reason. There's a long history here of medical establishment not telling the truth and doing some really awful things over history. And so for us to be able to have one of our African American pharmacists go out and speak directly to the community that he lives and works in and says, look, I've looked at this information. I have an aunt that was asking me a lot of questions. My mom was asking me a lot of questions. I was asking a lot of questions. And I feel a lot better about this. Then we were able to have a much more localized strategy where we had everything from satellite media tours to making sure that we were going to local news and showing up the stations. And we were able to take our pharmacists that people already knew, and we were able to say, trust us on this. And because they knew us, they did.
Yeah, I love that. And a lot of it is about, to your point, not only the people you choose, but the words you choose, right? And the language you're using and the way that you educate people. And, you know, I think what Premier has done a really good job of is thinking about, you're kind of talking about pretty complex topics, right? So supply chain reliability, you're applying artificial intelligence to improve that. What does that even mean to a stakeholder, let alone a reporter who's trying to write about this for the first time? And you all have done a really good job, I think, of educating the media about some of these more complex topics so that they can be understood in the community. So talk to us a little bit about how you did that and navigated that.
So I'm going to break it apart because I think they're two separate questions in a way, because there's the supply chain side of our business, which is one kettle of fish, and then there's the AI and the tech enablement side, which is another. I think when it comes to supply chain, it's relatively easy to understand what that means. You know, this is made by this company who buys their ingredients from this company, who buys their raw materials from this company, and on we go. What I think people misunderstood and perhaps didn't realize was how interdependent supply chains were and how many supply chains needed to come together to make one thing. So we had, for instance, the administration out telling everybody, we have tons of tests. There's anybody that wants a test can go get a test. We have tons of them. But then people in communities were saying, I can't get a test. And we had reporters calling us and saying, who's lying? Well, the truth is neither were lying. We did have plenty of tests. We couldn't administer them because there was a shortage of the swab. I call it the brain tickler that goes back into the back of your brain and gets all the gets all the sample, which is what we were using at the outset. That was made by one company in Italy who was in the middle of a pandemic, and they had shut down and they had all these restrictions, and so they didn't have workers. They couldn't produce the supply. It was one company that was making all of these swabs, so that was the rate limiting step. So helping people understand that, like, a syringe is not just a syringe, it's a needle and a barrel and a this and a plastic. Helping people understand all of that so that we could see around corners. I think the biggest group that we had to educate on that was the government, who did not understand at all that one thing is involved 10 different supply chains, and that you needed to look around the corner on all of them. So I think that was the lesson learned on supply chain. When it comes to AI and the tech enablement side of things, that's a little bit of a mixed bag. On the one side, I think people are enormously enamored with technology, and they see it as a future forward thing, and the hope, right? They see the promise of it, but then there's also some mistrust, particularly around AI. Will the bots replace me? Will an algorithm be diagnosing me as opposed to a human? So there's a lot of tripwires when you get into that sort of thing. The way I think that we've tried to navigate that space is really dealing with the here and now. I think a lot of tech companies, this is writ large, it's a blanket statement, not everyone, but a lot of companies very much oversell and overpromise. They get so enamored with the future promise of what their technology could do. They're talking about things that are nowhere near being a real thing. And then people get frustrated, like, wait, I thought this was gonna be the technology that was gonna cure cancer and we still have cancer, what happened? So we try to deal with grounding in what is the here and now. I have modest desires for what the public understands about our technology. I want them to see it as technology that works, that solves real problems, and is backed by a very large data set in the industry. That's it, right? So I'm trying to ground it in real things that are very simple to understand, that are solving real problems that are pervasive right now. And as we can demonstrate that and we provide those use cases that are simple, people can start to say, I get what this technology is for, I get why it's important, I get how it's needed in hospitals. Just being able to say, wouldn't it be better if this wasn't on paper? You know? And that's a real thing. Like, most hospitals and health systems are paper-based systems. And just being able to say, we're just trying to automate some of that. Just the purchasing process. Wouldn't it be better if they didn't cut checks? Wouldn't it be better if they could do this electronically? Mm-hmm. That's a simple thing, and that's part of what our technology suite will do.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, I'm sure this all rings a bell for you, right? Because a lot of parallels to gene therapy and just people trying to get their head around the way that operates. But one of the biggest stories for me in health this year was the biotech industry, and a lot of ups and downs, a lot of volatility in the market, a lot of kind of science that maybe didn't come to fruition, but also a lot of highs, especially for you all with 2 FDA approvals. So how do you as a communications leader keep people focused on the bigger picture and the long-term vision when you're navigating all of these ups and downs that the industry has had over the last few years?
Yeah, I think great question, Kristen. And I think anyone who follows the markets is aware that the biotech industry has been on a bit of a roller coaster. I think felt it, the market changes maybe even more acutely than others. For Bluebird, we're very fortunate. We did have 2 FDA approvals in August and September of this year, and we are proud to say that we have 2 of the 4 FDA-approved gene therapies today. So in a really great position, I think, as a company, but we know that there is sort of this huge wave of innovation that's coming behind us, and an enormous wave of gene therapy that represents an entirely different way of thinking about medicine. Think about a one-time therapy that you get that is intended to have an effect for a lifetime versus something that you take every day and are going to your Walgreens to pick up your prescription. The science is extremely complex. So take mRNA and then I think sort of turn it on its head as far as how complex the science is. And the reality is that there are significant risks associated with these therapies and complex decisions that need to be made about them. One of the pieces of work that we actually did with GCI this year did relate to really drilling down and honing in on the components of our overall platform that were most meaningful for people, that could give them confidence in how deeply studied these therapies are, that they didn't sort of just spring up from out of nowhere, but that this is actually decades of work that's brought us to this point. To talk about what we know about when you receive a gene therapy and what happens within your body, and why that's important to you, and why that's a discussion that you should be having with your healthcare provider. And more than anything, I think that concept of transparency has been incredibly important for us, is to just be as upfront as we can about what our data show, what they don't show, what will be determined over time. We have navigated some really difficult times with the FDA, with gene therapies being on clinical hold. And what we want people to understand is that this is part of the process of really bringing forward an entirely new category of therapies. So that consistency of message, I think, was first and foremost. And then I think it actually goes back to the purpose question, which is never losing sight of the big picture, which is what does it mean for a patient? And how do you really bring forward those voices that say, okay, I understand and I can see sort of all of the facts laid out, and I'm going to make an informed decision for myself, for my family, for my child, because I know what it's like to live with this disease every day.
Yeah, I love that. And a very full circle moment, because I think Erin started in the beginning talking about how we don't have to be perfect, right? Yeah. We just have to be honest, and it's okay if we don't know everything. And I've seen such an opportunity for folks in the gene therapy space and other complex scientific areas to say, look, here's what we learned. We're still learning. We're students, and that's okay. We're in it with you. And just to admit that vulnerability, as you were saying in the beginning. So I love that lesson. So switching gears a little bit, and I think probably we'll have time for one more question. Would love to ask you all, obviously one of the other big things that came out of the last few years is this idea of our employees and our teams as both our greatest ambassadors, but also perhaps our harshest critics, right? Kind of like our children. So, I'd love to hear from you, and Erin, maybe you can kick us off, how you've navigated that in terms of, you obviously have a broad swath of employees at Walgreens who are doing lots of different things. How have you navigated that mix between transparency and confidentiality and really just engaging and motivating a diverse workforce?
Yeah, so I actually am on record as saying that the most important part of our jobs is team member communications. If you can't deliver a message to your own teams, by the way, we pay them, so that's extra incentive, and it can't land there, then how are you going to influence any other stakeholder? And if you start with your team members, and your team members are informed, inspired, motivated, that spreads to your customers, which eventually spreads to your investors. That's the order this should all work, right? So think about if we had an environment at our stores where you walked in and there wasn't a single team member anywhere talking to you. They didn't talk to you at the cash register. They just rung you up and gestured for you to go to the door. They didn't give you advice about your medication over the counter of the pharmacy. What I'm getting at is we empower our teams to speak to our customers each and every day at 9,000 stores. That shouldn't be any different than when they're on social media or using any other channel. In fact, we should give them those tools so that they can get the word out even more. Going back to my earlier point, our team members are our best representation of our brands. Brands are not logos or font size or the color of your logo. They are feelings over facts. And the only thing that brings across feelings, it's not an advertisement in a slick magazine. It's a human connection. It's being able to know a face, be able to put an emotional element into it. And if you are able to establish that, then everything else comes from there. So when we're in the middle of the pandemic, we wanted to make sure as much as possible our team members, especially those that were showing up at our stores each and every day, felt like they were supported. If they felt like they were being supported, they were going to support our customers.
Yeah, love that. Sarah?
Yeah, I think as far as employee communications, I mean, this is where actually the don't let perfect get in the way of good comes to play for me. And I think that we're truly in an age of and need to continue that high touch, real time communication with our teams and with individuals at all levels of the company. And I think through the pandemic, we sort of moved, and even today, to a place where having this sort of glossy, completely produced update and doing things only at certain increments of time has been thrown out the window. And we're in an age of pop-up communications, more open discussion, less slides, open chats where you can have them. I think transparency around Q&A and what questions are on people's minds. And that actually you get a lot of credit for not shying away from the fact that the question was asked, even if you have to say, I can't answer that in this forum. I think one of our values is keep it real, and we try to really embody that in everything that we do. And anyone who is too corporate or too much spin gets called out pretty immediately. But it has required in an organization that's maturing to ensure that our employees understand we can't share everything. That this isn't just whatever happens in the executive team boardroom can be kind of broadcast around the organization, but we'll share as much as we can, and we will provide those real-time authentic updates and be clear when we can't.
Yeah, great.
I think for us it was really two things. I mean, I've already talked about how Premier is a really mission-oriented organization. I think we were very glad to have that mission to orient ourselves around during the pandemic and to really, that was our guidepost, that was our North Star. And we recognized every day that what everybody recognized all the way, from the janitor to the C-suite, everybody recognized that what we were doing was hugely impactful. We work every day with hundreds of thousands of individual clinicians that were providing direct frontline care to COVID patients at great personal risk to themselves. I think the WHO estimates that probably 115,000 direct caregivers caught and died of COVID. For us, I think this is a once in 100-year event. We were called to serve, and you don't put people in voicemail. You answer the call. And for us, we felt very passionately about that, about our ability to help and our ability to serve. And I regarded myself, in my role, I thought the least I could do was show up and to help our members get the supplies and the products that they need to do their job. And oftentimes that involved crazy schedules, and work-life balance was very much out the window. My children ask me if I love my phone more than them. But I could honestly look them in the face and say, no, of course not. But what mommy's doing right now is extremely important, and it benefits you. So our team very closely architect around that. We also have a philosophy about real talk. And I know as communicators, oftentimes it's rule number one, don't speculate. But I think there is a way to speculate smartly, in the sense that you can say what you don't know, and you can say why you don't know it. Mm-hmm. And I think more than anything, people just want to know the why. If there's a legit reason why you can't do something or why you can't say something, if they know why that is, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. So I think we engaged in some communications maybe that made us a little uncomfortable because it's not the way that we were necessarily taught. But I mean, once in 100 years. So the playbook goes out the window to a certain extent, and you have to deal with what's real. And we were candid with people, and I think candor paid off, and I think candor bought us some respect.
Great. All right, Ed, you have the last word.
Just real quick, I think it goes back to purpose, right? We tied in, and employee pride. I mean, the whole idea that we were working on breakthroughs that change patients' lives. We created an app right before the pandemic that allowed employees to share information with their own social networks. It pushed it to their phone. They could connect to their Facebook, to LinkedIn, to Twitter, and they could easily share. Before the pandemic, we had, I think, a few thousand people on it before. Now we've got 85,000 colleagues. It was the whole idea that colleagues, their families, their friends were asking them questions. They knew they worked at Pfizer. This gave us a chance to share information with colleagues that they could share with their networks as well. And the impressions are in the millions on it. It's just been very impactful for us. So it's tapping into that pride.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all. I want to thank our panelists for being here. I am definitely more inspired than ever about the power of communications to democratize health, to address health inequities, and to have a seat at the table. So thank you all for your time and for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.